Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. Well, Pierre Poilievre is heading back to Parliament. Is that a blessing or a curse? Well, it depends on your political leanings, but it's a question many Canadians are asking, and by the way, it's also a question that many Conservatives are asking. Oh, they're not saying it out loud, not yet. You have to show party unity and all that sort of thing, after his by-election win just a few days ago. But there are some serious concerns about Poilievre's leadership, both short-term and long-term. There's still a lot of Conservatives that are hurting from the election results, of course, this past spring, which I saw them blow a 20-odd point lead and not get power. And we'll talk about that in more detail in just a couple of seconds. So those that have expressed some concern about Poilievre's future are pointing not just to the way that he handled himself during the election campaign, but what's going to happen going forward. Well, maybe we got a little inkling of that over the last couple of days. Even in his acceptance speech after his by-election win the other day, Poilievre simply says that, he's going to go to Ottawa and they're going to oppose the Liberal agenda and then introduce, he says, some stuff that's going to prove, their way of wanting to do things. But if you look at the details of some of the things that he's talked about in the last couple of days, a lot of this is just a regurgitation of many of the issues and many of the points that he raised during the election campaign. And voters pretty much have given their thumbs down to many of those things, including some of the environmental issues. I noticed he didn't touch a whole lot about the economy and about tariffs either, which kind of indicates what we've been talking about on the podcast, that Poilievre doesn't really have an answer for that. He just wants to criticize what the current government is doing. But let's backtrack just a little bit and get some foundation here for what's happening here. We all know, of course, that last year, Poilievre had a huge lead, over 20-point lead at one point, over the Justin Trudeau Liberals, and it looked like a fait accompli that he was going to not just win, but win big, and of course be the next prime minister. Well, unforeseen circumstances, Trudeau steps down, Mark Carney becomes leader of the Liberal Party and the de facto prime minister, of course, and there should have been a pivot at that point. Politically speaking, that would have been the smart move to make. Poilievre didn't change, though. He's seemingly is a one-trick pony. He's still going after Trudeau and the Trudeau policies, and it just didn't work clearly in the election. The polling has indicated that things are not necessarily that rosy for him and the Conservative Party right now. In April, of course, during that election, the Conservatives won 41.3% of the national popular vote and finished just a couple of points behind the Liberals. That's ancient history right now. But according to Aaron Wary and CBC.ca, recent polling indicates that they've slipped even from there, and the Conservative support now is down to about 38%, and the Liberals have climbed up to 45%. So if you're a Conservative supporter and a Poilievre supporter, and those aren't necessarily the same thing, they're not the sort of thing that they should be looking for right now. And just to add salt to that wound, I guess, if you look at who Canadians prefer as prime minister, Carney has a 28-point lead over Poilievre. 51.7% favor Carney, and only 23.7% favor Poilievre as the leader. So he's got a lot of work to do, and you got to figure, okay, what's the strategy going to be here? The suggestion that maybe he has to change is out there. It's been talked about for quite some time, but we don't get any indication from that. Even during the summertime of the Calgary Stampede speech, when Pierre got in front of a microphone, a lot of the same talking points that he simply used during the election. Anti-liberal this, anti-liberal that, anti-environmental policies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He made big deal about he had a big announcement one day that they were going to relieve the ban on plastic straws. And, is that really where he's pointing here? Because I know that the stuff that he's talking about is things that have been tried and tested with their core supporters, and the Conservatives love this sort of stuff. But the thing is, politics, like so many other things in life, is all about timing. Those may be policies that are going to be popular with the Conservative voters, but given the time and circumstances that we have right now, maybe it's time for a little flexibility. Maybe you don't go hard on some of these policies. Maybe you back off a little bit, deciding that maybe it's the best thing in long term for the economy to get it back on its feet. Example is what Carney has done since he's become prime minister. He got rid of the carbon tax, of course, on day one, and has looked at a number of other policies right now that basically run contrary to what the Trudeau government was doing, which I think actually helps him in two different ways. First of all, it seems to reach out to the Canadians who are very concerned about the impact those policies were going to have on our long-term economic front, especially in light of what's going on with tariffs. Second of all, it goes a long way towards indicating to Canadians that Mark Carney is not Justin Trudeau, and this is not just a continuation of the Trudeau policies. Clearly, there's another direction. As we've talked about on the podcast, from a liberal historical standpoint, Mark Carney is more of a Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien liberal than he is a Trudeau liberal. And I think he's making his mark right now. And according to this polling, Canadians seem to be accepting that. So how does Poilievre respond? Well, in the short period, he's simply saying he's not going to change, which is rather indicative of the fact that he just seems to be bullheaded and this is the way things are going to be. People are what they are, but at the same time, you have to be able to read the room in politics. And right now, what we're looking for is people that can be that flexible. I know that just the other day, Poilievre talked about a number of different environmental initiatives that he would scrap if he was prime minister. It's not going to happen anytime soon. But the one that he pointed out, of course, was the EV mandate, which is in the news these days. And you got to wonder sometimes, do these guys not pay attention to what's going on? We've talked about the EV mandate. Now, of course, this is something from the Trudeau government, that automakers in this country have to produce so many EVs, and that's going to be an ever-increasing number until we get to what they think is going to be a total EV auto market. Well, it's not going to happen, especially because of some of the things that are going on with tariffs and some of the other economic ideas. So Poilievre's idea that he wants to scrap that may be a dollar short and about a day late on this. The indications seem to be that Mark Carney is probably going to scrap it anyway, because he had an awful lot of discussions and getting a lot of pressure now from automakers to simply say, look, we can't do it. Not only is it unattainable, but it's economic suicide given what's going on with the auto industry and with Trump and his tariffs. And just like Carney has done with some other Trudeau policies, the likelihood is sometime in the next month or so, when they get back to work in Parliament, it's September 15th, by the way, that he'll probably scrap that. And they already have started that process. There were federal government incentives to buy EVs, and that was done part and parcel with this Trudeau legislation about, the quotas that had to be attained. The government's paused that. They haven't eliminated it yet, but they have said, no, we're not doing it. Let's get the lay of the land. So all indications are that that's the road they're going down. Excuse the metaphor there. That indicates that the government is listening to what the industry is saying, listening to what the consumers are saying, and acting accordingly. Now, pure environmentalists may be upset about that, but like we said just a second ago, timing is everything in politics, and this doesn't seem to be the time to be pursuing what a lot of people are talking about. It's wonderful to be idealistic in politics, but you've got to water that down a little bit, or some would say strengthen it with a little such strength of pragmatism, and that seems to be what Carney is doing right now, which all goes back to, okay, so where does Poilievre stand? Where does he make his mark? Is it simply by going up there and opposing everything the government is doing? Is that really the tactic that they want to take? Even Doug Ford, who seems to be one of the most popular conservatives in the country right now, and I don't know if he has leadership ambitions or not. I think he does, but he's certainly not going to talk about it now. But just a couple of days ago, Ford met with the Prime Minister to talk about economic issues. One of the upshoots, when they had their presser after the meeting, Ford talked to Poilievre and simply said, look, knock off with the partisan stuff. Well, this is not time for partisan politics. It's time for Canadians to unite and support the government in their initiatives to try to fight what's going on with Washington and the tariffs, which seems to be what Ford is doing. I know that he's been quite vocal about the fact that he's not happy with everything that the Carney government is doing when it comes to responding to the Trump moves. But at the same time, he understands that, okay, I'm part of the team and we got to play ball, and there's still going to be some dialogue. And the fact that Carney has done that and established that point of contact, not just with Ford, but with the other premiers too, I think is really starting to pay dividends right now, because they feel as if they're being included in this. Maybe not always listened to and their advice is going to be taken, but at least they're at the table. And that hasn't happened with previous prime ministers, going back quite a few years, by the way, not just with Justin Trudeau. So there's that. And that goes back, I think, what Carney was talking about building a team and having that kind of support that's going on. And that's the enemy. The enemy, as far as Canadians are concerned right now, is not the federal government. It's what's happening in the states. And what we're looking for here is unanimity at all three levels to try to fight this thing. And we all have to be on the same page, or at least they do, for us to actually be effective in combating what's been happening with some of Trump's tariff measures. And, we know that it could well get worse before it gets better. We've talked about that strategy on previous podcasts. So where does Pierre Poilievre fit into this? And how is he going to show Canadians that he's different, he's changed? Because there's a bottom line here and I'll just go right to that bottom line for a second. The indications are from past polling that has been done over the last couple of years, Canadians don't like this guy. I know that's harsh language, but that's the reality. Truth can sometimes be rather stinging, but the indications are that they may favor some of the policies that Poilievre has talked about, but they just don't seem to like him. That just warm up to him. There's something about this guy that they just don't seem to be able to embrace. And if you don't trust a leader, and if you don't at least like a leader to a certain extent, the chances of them actually gaining power are pretty slim. And that's something that Poilievre doesn't seem to want to admit to. I know he relishes the cheers and the ovations he gets from his base, but that's his base. They're going to do that no matter what. And if he gets replaced by somebody else next week, that somebody else, that replacement, is going to have the same sort of adulation from the base. He needs to expand that base. And I have yet to see, and certainly not hear, of any indication that Poilievre, A, understands that, and B, has a plan to try to capture the hearts and minds of Canadian voters who basically turned their backs on him during the last federal election. So it comes right back to the question that we just talked about. Is Poilievre's return going to help or hurt the Canadian government? And certainly, is it going to help or hurt the Conservative Party? Well, right now, the jury is out on both of those questions, and we'll see. Basically, it's going to come down to performance and how that performance is going to be, I guess, digested by the Canadian public, and we'll do our analysis. And that's going to be a factor when he goes to the leadership review in January, which, by the way, is mandated. That's going to happen no matter what, simply because they lost that last spring election. So are Conservatives going to embrace Poilievre, or are they going to be looking at him and saying, okay, you got one more shot here, guy? And that's going to be a very, very fascinating process to watch. And we'll talk about that certainly on the podcast. That's it for this edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast. You can pick us up wherever you get your podcasts, of course, on whatever platform. By the way, if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget, hit the notification bell, okay, so we can spread the word. Check the podcast descriptions, as you always do, I can see, for further reading material on the subjects that we're talking about. And please, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, okay? Your loyalty to the podcast is heartening, really it is. And it's wonderful to get so many new faces and new voices coming at us almost every week with our podcast. We love to see that. But by hitting that subscribe button, well, you help us to grow and to continue the work that we're doing. And that's essential, I think, for the Canadians in general and for us to have a say and to have a voice in these very difficult political times that we're facing these days. But we love talking about it, and we love hearing from you as well. Thanks, as always, to Madeline Kelly for the great work putting this one together. I'm Bill Kelly. Until next time, stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.